Hi everyone, welcome back to my lab and today's video, which is going to be a first impressions demo and my thoughts on the new Morphe by Jaclyn Hill Vault collection. Today we're focusing on the Armed and Gorgeous palette to create this look that you see right here. I will walk you through the steps to create the look and also give you my first initial impressions using the palette. I've already used the Dark Magic palette, so if you're interested in seeing my first impressions on that one as well as the look using that one, I'll link it up in the cards. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so here's a preview of the look that we're going to be creating today. We're using the Morphe and Jaclyn Hill Armed and Gorgeous palette. The first shade we're going to go into is the shade Access, and I'm using a Makeup Forever 242 brush. This is going to be my first transition, and I'm roughly placing it underneath my brow and also underneath the lower lash line. My primer today was Tarte Shape Tape and translucent powder. Next we're going in with Secure and a Smith 247. And I'm placing that next shade just underneath the first. Next we're using Agent, and I'm using Adelium Tools number 781. This brush is a little bit more stiff, and so I have to make sure to tap off the excess because it digs into the pan quite a bit. When using softer brushes, there's not that much kick up. So you can see here's where I was using a stiff brush and here's where I was using a softer brush, as well as this one. You can see that these two don't have as much kick up as this one. So if that bothers you, then definitely use your softer brushes. And I'm pretty gentle with my eyeshadow palettes, but this brush is just a little bit stiffer. Now I'm using Smooth Criminal, and I'm putting that on a Smith 256, and I'm going to use this on the outer V of my eye. I'm going to use that Adelium Tools 781 in the shade Secure, and I'm just going to work the transition between Smooth Criminal and the other shades. Back to Access and that Makeup Forever brush, I'm just going to blend the edges and the lower lash line. This is the only shade I've placed in the lower lash line so far. Okay, so that's pretty good. Last time I chose to use the shimmers dry, and so this time I decided to give them a little bit of help, and I'm going to use concealer. So the two shades I'm going to be using are these two right here. They are the shades Guilt Trip and Coin. To cut the crease, I'm going to use the Milani. It's called the Retouch and Erase. It's a concealer I don't like as concealer, so I use it to cut my crease and things like that. I'm going to try doing this with a larger brush, so I'm using a MAC 249. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Now, like I said, the two shimmers I used were Guilt Trip and Coin, and to be perfectly honest, there was not that much difference between the two on the eye. Like, I can't really tell on the other side. I'm getting a little bit of creasing here. I'm going to start with Guilt Trip, and I have a Makeup Forever 228. I'm gonna stick with the same brush, and I'm going to use the shade Coin, and you'll see that there's just not that much difference between the two on the actual eye. Now, just so you know, to pick up the shades, I'm kind of scraping a little bit, and then I pat the brush. And that's how I'm picking up the color. Now that the metallics have something to adhere to, I'm finding that there's not as much fallout. But like you can see, I have two different shades on my eye, and to me, they look the same. So now I'm going back in with the Smith 256 and the shade Smooth Criminal, and I'm just going to blend out the edge. For the inner corner, I use the shade VIP, and I don't feel that it quite coordinates with the rest of the palette. It's such an icy color when the rest of the palette is so warm. I think it would make a really nice brow bone highlight, but as far as an inner corner highlight, that's my only option. And I want to stay with the options in the palette. But if I was doing this look just outside of the scope of this palette, I would use a different highlight. Maybe a little more champagne toned one, or I didn't have to use any at all. I just want to use as many of the shades in the palette as I can. For the lower lash line, we went into Top Secret with a MAC 221. To finish the look, I lined my inner waterline with NARS Larger Than Life eyeliner in the shade Barrow Street. I did wing liner with my Kat Von D Trooper, mascara with the Milk Makeup Kush mascara, and we applied some falsies. So I'm going to do all of those things off camera, and I will be right back. Here's your finished look with all the final touches applied. I really like how this look turned out. Alright, so now you see my completed look. My lip color, in case you're interested, is by Bite Beauty, and it is this one right here in the shade, looks like Porcini. Help me out. I think this was one of the limited edition shades, something about earth. I don't remember. It was a limited edition collection about, I think it was edgy neutrals or something like that. I bought it full price, but it eventually went on sale. I don't know if you might still be able to find it, but any mustardy brown will definitely complement the look just fine. Now, my thoughts on the palette. This was the Armed and Gorgeous palette. So here we have the shades that I used, and I have thoughts about this one. I have to say I like this one more than I liked the Dark Magic palette, because I found that this palette was a little bit easier to manage. I think that if you're a beginner, this is going to be a really easy palette for you to use. I used absolutely every shade except for these two. I did not use Prowl and I did not use Classified, but I used absolutely every other shade in the palette, and so I do have my opinions. I like the mattes in the palette. The warm neutrals are pretty easy for Morphe to do at this time, I would say. That's been their specialty for so long. And one of the things that I noticed in this palette is that you really cannot mess up the blending. Like, even if the shadows don't blend that well, you have such a perfect color gradient here, starting from Access to Secure to Agent to Smooth Criminal to Prowl, that you really cannot mess up the blending. So I think that it's a really beginner-friendly palette. Now, as far as the shade Top Secret, it functioned really well, but I only applied it to my lower lash line. I didn't try to apply it to larger areas of my face, and so I can only comment based on that experience, and I thought it was fine. I did blend it with the shade Access, and I got a good result. Now, the one brow bone or inner corner highlight shade in this palette is the shade VIP, which is a really pretty shade. It's a very frosty white shade, but I don't think that it complements the color story of the rest of the palette, because the rest of the palette is quite warm tone, if you can see there, and this one is very frosty. So I think it's very contradictory to the rest of the color story, and I would have preferred to see something more champagne gold. It's still a little cliche and still very common, so it's not like I don't have one in my collection that I could use, but if you're relying on just this palette, this one is not 100% in harmony with the rest of the shades, in my opinion. Would I recommend this palette? I would recommend it. I think that this one is a lot easier to work with, especially if you're a beginner. And if you hide these two shades, you really have just a warm neutrals palette, reminiscent of ColourPop's Yes Please palette, Natasha Denona's Sunset palette, for example, or any other warm neutral palette that you can imagine. It's got similar tones going on. My one complaint was when I used the two shimmers here, I used Guilt Trip, I used Coin. I didn't see any differentiation. I have them both on my lid, and I could have used one or the other, and I think it would have looked the same. So I think that it would have been nice to have had different shades. Maybe a deeper gradient. I'm not sure, but these two, they just looked exactly the same. I would have really liked to have seen the green tone that this one appears to have in the palette, but I don't see it right now. Maybe if I combined it with the shade Top Secret, then it would bring out the greenish tones in that shade. But that was the one thing I noticed. Other than that, I thought the palette was nice quality. Definitely a lot easier to use than Dark Magic, and I would recommend it. I think it's worth the $15. I don't think it's as unique as the others, so you may have shades like this in your collection already, and you may be able to create any look that you might come up with this palette with shades that you already have, especially if you don't plan on using that olive green. Now, as I've continued to use the palettes, I realized that you cannot fold the mirror back, and it also doesn't prop up. I would like one or the other. I would like it to prop up so I can see myself as I'm doing my makeup, or I would like to fold it entirely back so that it's not in my way, but it stays like this. It doesn't fold all the way back. So that's one of the things that I would have improved on the packaging. Otherwise, you have a very nice mirror inside, a 12-month shelf life. You have 16 grams of product total, and the product functioned really well. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, I know that there's some concern over the batch codes, so I'll share my batch code with you. It is AB05N, and that's the same batch code I had in the Dark Magic palette. So those are my first impressions and demo on that palette. I do love the look that I came up with, though. I really like it. I think that you can get a similar look if you have subculture. So if you have subculture and you want to create something like this, try it. I think that you could definitely come up with something using that palette because it has some similarities in the color story there. So those are my first impressions using the palette. This is the second one I've used. I hope you're enjoying the little series on the Vault collection. I know that there's a lot of videos going around about this, and it's a very controversial release at this moment, but I'm just here for the makeup, and I'm letting you know what I think about the makeup itself. If you did enjoy the video, please don't forget, give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to leave your comments in the comment section down below, what you're thinking about the palette, what your experience has been, and if you have a preference for which palette you'd like to see next. So thank you again for joining me for another video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you're not getting too sick of seeing this makeup look, as I'm filming quite a lot of videos today. I just wanted to keep the content coming. I'm really enjoying the work I'm putting into my YouTube channel, and hopefully it shows. Definitely keep your feedback coming because I really take it into consideration as I move forward. So that's it. Let me not keep chatting. Thank you so much for joining me again. I hope you're having a lovely one, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon on my next one. Bye-bye.